The meeting of the San Francisco Ethics Commission will now come to order. First up, any public comment on matters
Roll call.
appearing? I'm sorry, roll call. Let's not forget that. Commissioner Rennie?
Here.
Commissioner Studley?
Here.
Commissioner Herr?
Here.
Okay. Then, any public comment on matters on the agenda or not on the agenda at this time?
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Larry Bush. I'm here representing Friends of Ethics. We wanted to suggest that in the future, the agenda include an update on pending legislation at the state level that will have an impact on San Francisco campaigns and reporting. That's particularly timely now because we're going into an election season, and if legislation such as the California Disclose Act passes, it will have a direct impact on what it is that people are required to do here. So it would be good to have the Ethics Commission provide an update. This is similar to what the FPPC itself does. And I also would note that the Los Angeles Ethics Commission is participating directly in the conversations with the FPPC and the state on the California Disclose Act and offering their insights from their experience. And I'd recommend that the San Francisco Ethics Commission also participate in discussions so that they can have the benefit of your experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush.
I would just mention to the Commission that we're spending the day at the FPPC on June 11th.
Very good. And that seems like a good suggestion to have a regular update whenever there is pending legislation that we should be aware of or that impacts anything that we do. Any other public comment at this time? Okay. The next item is a discussion and possible action on a request for a waiver from Alan Martinez, former member of the Historic Preservation Commission.
This particular waiver is a little bit different than the last one that the Commission considered. The prior one was a waiver so that someone could serve on a commission. This one is for someone who has left a commission and requires a waiver to conduct his particular business, in this case architecture. I believe Mr. Martinez is here to present and answer any questions you have.
Is this on? I imagine you've read the documents, and basically the way that the charter is written, there's no distinction between the planning department and the HPC. So my work is routinely reviewed by the planning department, so I need this waiver to continue to work in San Francisco to get reviewed by the planning department. But of course, I can't have dealings with my own commission, and frankly, for the past 4 years, I haven't had a project that had come before my own commission. Most of my work these days is relatively small remodeling, small additions, and that sort of thing. And I haven't had even a project that went before the Planning Commission in the last 4 years. So at least for the next year, I would need this waiver just really to continue to work because my projects are reviewed by the Planning Department. But again, I would still be excluded from any representation before the HPC. So, do you have any questions? Or?
Commissioners, any questions of Mr. Martinez at this time?
I do have one question. Excuse me. Not so much with respect to the particular waiver for you, but in your letter you said that it was your understanding that after the completion of your term that Section 3.234 could be waived. And I just think it's important for all members of such bodies to get an accurate understanding of whether waiver is possible. So I would just like to know from whom you got that understanding? Who talked to you?
Yeah,
about-
well, basically what happened is this is a new commission.
Mm-hmm.
And it does have, seats with particular qualifications, and the one that I served in was for an architect with a background in historic preservation. And so it does have very particular qualifications, and, before I agreed to be on the commission, I did have a conversation with Marlena about the ethics aspect of this position and whether or not I'd be able to continue to work and to what extent I'd be able to have dealings with both the Planning Commission and the HPC. And it was my understanding from that conversation, and I may have misunderstood her, was that the waiver was more or less automatic and that I didn't actually have to come to this body. It was 4 years ago, and I don't really remember the details of the conversation, but, frankly, I wouldn't have taken the position if I knew that my work was going to be, but that I wouldn't be able to work. So, if I had known, I would have come to you 4 years ago for both the waiver during and after that I'm going for now. And I think that's, as you've seen in your last hearing, you did grant a waiver to David Sternberg. So I think the correction has been put in place in terms of the city attorney informing commissioners in a more clear fashion about what's expected of them. Because whatever the conversation was, which I don't remember the particulars of, I was left with the impression that it was a waiver as of right, not something that I actually had to request. So I think the correction has been made. And the reason that, this all came up was I was having a larger discussion with her about the details of the ethical, the extent of what I can do and what I can't do in my, for the next year. And I think some of that is detailed in here. So, but I think I'm clear now, and I've had some pretty thorough conversations with her, with Marlena.
Yeah. I appreciate that. The only reason I flagged it was not so much specific to you as to the commission and the city attorney's office being able to guide people who introduce, and I think the cool word is onboard, commission members and other people working with the city, and so that people, to avoid anybody getting caught in a misunderstanding that could be difficult for them later or presume determinations that we need to make. But it sounds like you're clear about that, and that
yeah, and I think
that
now,
we have the information that we need.
I think that now they're clear. They need to tell people before they agree to do it that they're going to have to go through this process.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I guess the question I have is that why we've got this requirement of the 1 year where you can't contact or deal with the department for who you served, and why is your case special that we should grant a waiver? Because clearly the legislation was not intended to be an automatic waiver. Everybody who came in and said we want a waiver.
I think it's special because of the qualifications for the seat. That it is required that it be an architect. That, first off, it has to be somebody who lives in San Francisco,
Right.
And second, it has to be someone with a preservation background and is an architect. And if you also add the additional qualification that they can't do work in the city, I think you have a very, very small pool of people to choose from. So I think it is in the public interest to keep this open to working architects, not only because you'll have a greater pool, but because people like me understand what's going on. People like me understand the housing, the building stock in San Francisco, understand the problems, understand what's possible and not possible, construction-wise. I think there is another commissioner on currently serving who is an architect and who is very intelligent and very capable. But he doesn't do work in San Francisco. He does work in other countries and so on and so forth. So I think he has a good understanding of historic preservation, but frankly, he doesn't know the San Francisco context as well as someone like me or David Sternberg. So I think it is in the public interest to keep it open to people like me.
Commissioner Herr?
Mr. Martinez, are you saying that you would agree not to petition the specific commission on which you served, the HPC?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, in the past 4 years, I've recused myself because friends had projects and so on and so forth, but I haven't had a project that came to the HPC in the past 4 years.
And you don't anticipate having a...
I don't anticipate that, and if one came up, I wouldn't take it. So, and I'm fine with that for a year.
An additional question that I have, I just want to clarify, you work entirely alone? You have
I work
no
entirely alone.
staff?
I used to have employees,
No partners?
before '08, but, I have no partners, so I have no one who could represent my firm besides myself. So I'm kind of stuck in that position. I don't anticipate I'm doing all right, but things are still pretty slow. I don't anticipate hiring anyone, certainly not another architect who could adequately represent my work. So,
Any other comments or concerns from the commissioners? Do I have a motion?
Well, I think that I would be in favor of this sort of waiver, but I would add the caveat that he would not be permitted to come before the HPC. I mean, I think that's where I'm able to find that there wouldn't be the potential for undue influence. I think the fact that he has some actions before the Planning Commission on which he didn't serve and which is really a body that I'm not sure he ever appeared in front of even as part of the HPC, and the additional caveat that's included in the memo, I would be comfortable with.
Thank you, Commissioner Herr. Also, I would say, since this is the second waiver request that has come before us from this particular commission, perhaps we need to meet with the director of that commission or whoever the appointing body is, so that individuals who are appointed to the Historic Preservation Board have a full understanding of what is involved once they leave that particular commission. Because otherwise, I think that we may continue to see continuing requests for waivers either before or after, and that is not the intent, and then there's something wrong with the process of who is chosen to be on that board, I would say.
I think that would be good. I mean, this all came out because of my inquiries and my initiative, talking to Marlena about what I couldn't do. If I hadn't said anything to her, I wouldn't even known I had to do this. So,
Well, we're glad you found out.
yeah,
Thank
me
you.
too.
Any public comment on this?
Hi, I'm Larry Bush for Friends of Ethics. We are not taking a position on this waiver, but I'd like to point out that the City Attorney's Office has been working for the past year on what's called a guide to good government that includes information on the rules for commissioners in terms of incompatible activities as well as conflicts of interest. It's not yet been made available online, but the commission, your commission, may want to urge that process be expedited. This is the 7th waiver since Mayor Lee became mayor that's come before this commission. You have granted 6 of the 7. All 6 that were granted were people who were part of the mayor's administration. The one that was not granted was a former aide to Ross Murkarimi. If you just looked at it from that standpoint alone, it does look as though there's not a balance in how things are being done. I realize every case is looked at on its own merits, but just take one step back and you have to ask yourself, to what extent are people being well informed about what their criteria are? When I worked in the mayor's office, we had a very hard time finding people who could serve on the police commission, because once you had lawyers who were sole practitioners, they would often take a client who was going to have a case that might end up before the police commission, in which case they could no longer vote on those issues. So it's not something that's just for historic preservation or just for those with special credentials. It's an overall issue, and it well deserves some examination. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Commissioner, if I may, John Givner, Deputy City Attorney. Just for the benefit of the public, Mr. Bush mentioned the City Attorney's Good Government Guide and indicated that it's not yet online. We've been producing our Good Government Guide, which discusses all applicable ethics, sunshine, and open meeting laws for many years. The current version of the Good Government Guide is available on our website. It discusses the post-employment rules, among many others. We are in the middle of an update, which we expect to put online this summer.
And it's online where, under the city attorney's website?
On the City Attorney's website under the Resources tab.
Perhaps Mr. St. Croix, or maybe we already do, have some kind of link to that. Do we have a link to that on our website? We do. We do? Okay. Because I think that is beneficial. But obviously, if there's an update, we'd like to know when that comes up. Thank you. Commissioners, how would we like to handle this? Do I have a motion?
I move to grant the waiver subject to the limitation that Mr. Martinez's communications be on behalf of his architectural clients and not be extended to communications to influence governmental decisions on behalf of other persons or entities, and that it prevent him, and that it not include communications to the HPC.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion has passed. You are granted your waiver.
Thank you very much.
And if I just may add an editorial comment, it's not because you're an appointee of Mayor Lee or anything like that. I think that we really do look at each case individually, and it's important to note that. Okay, item 3, or item 4, excuse me. Budget Analyst report.
This discussion will be about the Budget Analyst report that was released last year. The essence of this report, I would like to point out, is that they found that there are some areas where Los Angeles practices are superior to San Francisco, and also several areas where San Francisco's are, I use the word superior, but the Budget Analyst report does not, I should say, more stringent. And that each city had some practices that were indeed better than the other. But it finds that neither the city nor and county of San Francisco or the city of Los Angeles is uniformly more or less stringent than the other. It boils down to a series of 7 areas where they express that they believe LA is more stringent. We'll be discussing those kind of one at a time tonight. I would just point out 2 of them. One of them that the frequency with which candidates must report in LA is a little bit off in that LA has primaries and San Francisco doesn't. They do, factoring that in, they do have, I believe, 2 more reports required every year than we do. Also, it considers that the higher limit for personal contribution limits is more stringent than San Francisco's limit of $500. I don't know that that qualifies as more stringent. It concludes that higher contributions may offset the influence of unregulated independent expenditures, and that's certainly something that the Commission can discuss. So we have 7 talking points in the staff memo, which I believe the chair is going to go through one at a time to discuss those areas. What the staff expects is to get feedback from the Commission on if you would like us to move forward in developing some proposals in these areas or not. And based on the feedback from the Commission, we will follow up with additional work on these areas to see about improving some of our practices where it's demonstrated that LA may be doing something better than we are. I would also just point out one other thing. The report is a recommendation to San Francisco. It's not to LA, so it doesn't feature as prominently those practices where San Francisco is better, although I think it does take them into consideration.
Okay. So let's start with the first question, which is, should San Francisco increase the period during which contractors, subcontractors, principals, and others may not contribute to political campaigns from 6 months to 12 months, and prohibit contractors, subcontractors, principals, et cetera, from fundraising on behalf of candidates? Do you want to give us an overview of where we are with that?
We used to have a window of 3 months where contributions couldn't get made. At one point, we sent it to from 3 months to 6 months. Obviously, LA has a longer period. The commission may certainly want to do that. And then again, the more stringent requirements regarding contracting on behalf of candidates is something we could certainly do. We would have to draft new regulations to expand those prohibitions and also figure out the best ways we would be able to track and enforce.
Now, you also had a number of meetings for interested parties.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us an idea, just briefly, on if there was an overwhelming opinion one way or the other from those people who attended those meetings?
Mabel.
I don't believe that there was an overwhelming desire by all the people who attended those meetings that we go one way or the other. Although I do think that a number of good suggestions were raised, and staff does recommend that we, again, look at Section 1.126 to determine where some modifications may be necessary.
Thank you. Commissioners? Questions, comments?
Well, at the present time, there isn't any kind of a prohibition in San Francisco insofar as fundraisers, is it? It just relates to direct contributions.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And I do think at the one meeting that I attended, interested parties meeting, that there was a fair amount of concern expressed about the fact that contractors, although they're prohibited from directly donating, that they could hold fundraisers and on behalf of the candidates. And I think some of the participants certainly felt that we ought to limit their ability to do that.
And we could certainly do that if the commission is interested in moving there. Again, we will put together proposals along those lines.
Are you saying just a complete prohibition of that?
For that 1 year period or the 6 month, yes.
So would you favor 6 month or 1 year period? Because I don't really, just speaking for myself, I don't really see, I don't understand what the difference is, what an additional 6 months can do or will do.
I think it's just a prophylactic. I mean, the more time you build in within reason, the less chance that the fundraising or donation is sort of a pay-for-play directly in response to approval of a contract or favor in contracting. I mean, I don't think I agree that there's no magic number. It's not like 12 will solve all problems and 6 doesn't solve any problems. But I guess for me, the question is, what is the additional burden with adding 6 months, and is it worthwhile? And based on what I've seen, it's really hard to make that determination.
I would add just one more factor to Commissioner Herr's good comment. also in the scales would be the public perception and whether a year seems a more natural or secure period of time. So I'd be interested in hearing public comment on that in particular, because I agree there's no magic number, but it is whether it feels to people like that's the way they conduct their activities or whether others do. I'll do something for you in 6 months. Is that different from, oh, I can't do it for a year? Would it reduce the likelihood of things happening that the public would feel uncomfortable with? So I think it is very much a perception, and there's no magic break point.
Anything else before we take public comment? Okay, any public comment on this particular issue?
Surprised you to be back. It's Larry Bush on Friends of Ethics. Just a couple of points on this one. In addition to the parts that you've discussed that's in this point 1, it also talks about contracts that are under $100,000. But contracts of under $100,000 are often the way in which a contract is begun and then slipped in. And right now we have federal authorities involved in criminal investigations of 2 contracts at the San Francisco Housing Authority, both of which came in at under $50,000, but which now have exceeded $100,000. The criminal investigation is whether or not the contracts were awarded due to undue influence. Also, the staff memo refers to the October 2010 memo about this section. And I would just point out, since 2 of the members of the commission were not on the commission at that time, that this is what the commission was told and what it voted to do. It said, based on my observations coming from the executive director, section 1.126 does not actually address a serious risk of pay-to-play arrangements, or even the appearance of pay-to-play in state agencies like the Redevelopment Agency or the Health Authority. Although city elective officers appoint some members of these bodies, city officials rarely have any involvement with those agencies' contracts. Prohibiting the contracting parties from making contributions to city elective officers does not practically serve the city's anti-corruption goal. Well, you have only to recall that the mayor just returned from China, accompanied by Lennar, where he was trying to assist Lennar in obtaining funding from China for Hunters Point. It's exactly the kind of thing. And the reason this provision was put into San Francisco's law was because there was a fundraiser at Treasure Island from Darius Anderson for Gavin Newsom. And that was viewed as being acceptable because at that time it was a state agency and it was not under the city contracting rules. So Commissioner Joe Lynn put in an amendment which the board approved and then the supervisors approved to include state agencies like the Housing Authority, like what would now be the successor agency, and like the Health Authority, so that they are covered. One of the reasons for going for a year instead of 6 months is because contracts get modified, as you've just seen with the Central Subway. In addition to which, candidates are prohibited, I believe this is correct, Mr. Givner will know, from collecting money for a campaign more than 180 days after the election is over, which is the 6-month period. It really should go for the full year so that they're not trailing afterwards. So I urge that you take a full year and look at the full range of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hello, I'm Glenn Rogers. I'm actually here for a ethics violation, but I wasn't really planning on speaking on this issue, although I feel as if I might be able to shed some light on it. You know, as a landscape contractor, I have had many times when I have waited 6 months for a project to begin, when you have large projects that have to do with city construction, you know, Park Merced, for example. This project's been going on for, waiting for development for over a year, year and a half. It could be as long as that into the future. I think the longer you have to wait, the longer you have the people wait in order to make a contribution, the more likely it's going to be a contribution that isn't going to have any influence. And I think undue influence is really what we want to avoid here. 1 year is good, but 2 years might even be better. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, David Pilpel. Just wanted to clarify as to Mr. Bush's point about the San Francisco Housing Authority. My understanding is that the Housing Authority is a separate agency from the city, created under state law and subject to HUD requirements, but not subject to city ordinances, although the mayor does appoint the members of the Housing Authority Board or Commission. I don't believe our ethics laws extend to the San Francisco Housing Authority. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pell. Any other public comment on this item?
Well, based on this conversation, I think that for item 1, we will go ahead and bring follow-up proposals, because you're not going to make any decisions tonight.
Might we make a decision tonight, or do you think it's?
No.
No, we didn't know.
No, because you need to have specific language in
Right,
front of it.
okay.
So we will have language where you will have the option of extending it to 12 months. We will look at the threshold, the $100,000 threshold, and whether you want to reduce that. And then we will look at restrictions and prohibitions on fundraising by contractors who are prohibited from making contributions. So based on the discussion on item 1, we're going to follow through on those.
Commissioner Herr?
Just a couple additional comments. On the $100,000, I'm personally at this point in favor of keeping the limit. I understand that there's a burden for those who are going for contracts of that size, that it doesn't apply in LA, but I think we're also, I think we have a smaller budget, right, than LA?
Yeah.
Overall. So as a percentage matter, I'm not sure the difference is as big as it seems. In addition, I think it would be very helpful to require the donors to affirm that they have not made contributions or have not done the things that are prohibited. I think that's a helpful thing that LA requires that we could benefit from. And then finally, I appreciate the effort that's been made into determining what we can do about electronic notification and disclosure, and I would encourage the continued evaluation of that, because that would be really helpful, and I think the public has benefited greatly from our efforts in other areas relating to electronic disclosure. And so to the extent that we're able to come up with additional solutions as time goes on, all the better.
Any other comments from the commissioners? All right, well, we will await the next step, back to us with more concrete language. But it sounds as if we may be leaning toward extending the period from 6 months to a year. And we may have more discussion about whether or not we should take the financial amount down to $50,000 or less. Although that seems like it would be quite burdensome, but at least maybe $50,000 would make sense.
I think it currently is $50,000.
Yeah. Is it, or is it it's $100,000 in LA? Yeah. So.
All right. Question 2, should San Francisco explicitly prohibit political contributions from registered lobbyists? This would be a major change. I don't imagine that it would make lobbyists happy, but it's sort of a clear decision in terms of a change in current San Francisco ordinance versus what LA requires. So I leave it to you to give us some ideas of how you feel about this.
Any comments?
As a practical matter, would this have a chance of passing the board?
I don't have a crystal ball on that. I'm sorry.
Mr. St. Croix, you've got all the answers. What's going on here?
Yeah. I think it would have a fighting chance, actually. There would no doubt be people who would lobby against it. The question I would initially have is do we, and this always comes up in the courts, do we have the ability to limit the rights of certain classes of people based on certain criteria? In this case, can we tell lobbyists that they can't exercise contribution rights because of what they practice? Obviously, if LA does it, no one has challenged it yet, at least not successfully. So from a practical standpoint, I'm not guaranteeing that it would pass that muster, but it appears that it might well.
Public comment.
Just a quick question. Could you remind us how many lobbyists there are right now? I'm trying to understand the scope of the constraint versus the potential value. Is roughly the number of...
We believe there are about 80. 86.
We just do this as an opportunity for Mr. Pilpel to
But there may be
speed research.
But the number may increase depending upon what happens with pending legislation at the Board of Supervisors. That would require others to register as lobbyists, so there may be many, many more, and that would make a big difference. So, anyway, public comment.
I think that Larry Bush for Friends of Ethics, this has strong support from the people of Friends of Ethics to ban lobbyists from making contributions. In addition to Los Angeles having a ban like this also is a ban that takes place at the state capitol in Sacramento. It is well done in many parts of the country. It's a clear example of pay-to-play. I think that the board would most likely pass it, though I don't think that's the consideration for this Ethics Commission. But if I were to make a guess, it would be, if it did not pass it, there would be 4 supervisors who would put it on the ballot, and it would pass with 80% of the vote. It's going to be very hard to explain to the public why you're allowing lobbyists to contribute to the people who are going to decide on the contracts for their clients.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. By the way, just as an aside, I didn't know that the commission had friends. So thank you. I'm very happy to know that. Any other comments?
I did feel, I'm sorry, this is Glenn Rogers again. I was involved in a supervisor election. I filled out this questionnaire. I thought this was an important question, and what I find so troubling here in San Francisco is that there seems to be such an interest in development and construction and making the city bigger and with more people. And it seems to me that there's some problem with San Francisco in that regard. It's almost like it's a cancer. And to me, it seems that the lobbyists are very likely to have some great influence on the amount of development that is occurring here in San Francisco. And so it would be my opinion that it would be nice to have fewer lobbyists or no lobbyists being involved in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional public comment?
What, when you speak of banning contributions, that's limited to how many dollars? What's it, 500 or something?
500.
But would that, if you put a ban in that they couldn't personally contribute 500, would anything stop the lobbyists from holding fundraisers or bundling money from other sources?
A specific ban on them making contributions would simply do that. You could extend the restriction to raising money and bundling, as we discussed, a few moments ago with contractors.
I guess what troubles me is that I don't think the lobbyist's $500 is going to be a pay-for-play. The political candidate's going to be looking for something far more than that if you're saying that. And I just wonder whether it's sort of trying to deal with a problem by swatting a net when you just single them out and say they can't make a contribution, but they are free to do everything else that they might do to raise funds and gain support of the candidate.
I have a question for Mr. St. Croix on this. So I'm looking at the memo on page 6, and it says from 2010 to 2012, lobbyists in San Francisco reported $614,175 in contributions. Those are contributions directly from the lobbyists themselves?
Yes, but I believe they're not just to candidate committees, but also to independent expenditure committees.
Okay, but in any event, if we're talking about 80-some lobbyists a year, we're talking about a lot more than $500 per lobbyist.
Well, there's no contribution limit to independent expenditure.
Well, fine, but my point is that it's not just, I mean, this is not necessarily swatting a gnat. This is a lot of money that lobbyists are contributing.
Mm-hmm.
Although, and I don't take a position, but ordinarily I would think of 2% of something as being a small share. So
2%?
600 is a significant number from a small number of people, but 2% of all contributions could either be viewed as a de minimis amount if it disappeared, or not enough to, your query, is it enough to alter the landscape at that level? Just which way you?
Right, although 2% from a very small number of people. Right, I mean.
Well, I agree with you, Commissioner Rennie. But I guess what I would say is perhaps it's at the very least, a symbolic gesture on the part of the commission, even though it's certainly not going to stop, the thousands and thousands of dollars that do pass through lobbyists or to candidates or politicians. So, but certainly it's a statement that we can make.
And I think in that case, too, we would be going beyond the restrictions in L.A., so we would have a more stringent in that case if we decided to do that.
Could you restate the suggestion, Commissioner Rennie? I'm just hearing a sense of convergence about a particular recommendation and wondered if you could take me back. If you could take me back to what.
Well, my only reservation was that to single out lobbyists, being unable to make contributions, it seemed to me that's a relatively small amount of money. Now, I didn't notice this $614,000 in contributions, although I assume that's to all political candidates over a 2-year period. But I just didn't know whether the ban would really be very meaningful in terms of trying to deal with the concerns of pay for play or the ability to influence political action. One clarification. I notice in that same paragraph it says during the same period lobbyists reported that their clients contributed $20,000. Is that part of the reporting that lobbyists have to make on the form? They report what their clients have contributed to political candidates? Okay.
So despite any prohibition, I mean, lobbyists have many alternatives for seeking funds for elected officials and or candidates, whether it's fundraisers or encouraging their own clients to make contributions or having fundraisers for that matter. This would not prevent fundraisers.
Not the language that Los Angeles has.
Have I used up my public comment? Can I say something further?
Certainly.
This has been an issue that you all are raising in good sense and with good points. Bundling is, of course, the biggest issue rather than individual contributions, as well as serving on finance committees. Last mayoral election, one of the newspapers asked one of the mayoral candidates for the list of people who were on that candidate's finance committee. And the candidate said, I'm not required to disclose that, and I'm not going to. Those people who were on that committee were, in fact, city contractors and city lobbyists. But they couldn't give, the contractors could not give directly. The lobbyists could, of course. The fact is, there are other loopholes as you go along. Last year, Mayor Lee created something called the Mayor Ed Lee Committee for San Francisco, which was not a candidate committee. It was a committee that he used as a general purpose committee. It raised $400,000. Almost all of it came from contractors and lobbyists, and he in turn gave that money for candidates and issues that he cared about in that election. One of the proposals before the state is to redefine what constitutes a candidate-controlled committee. So that's earlier when I said at the opening thing to get an update of what's going on in the state, there would be an implication, if that's passed at the state, of how it would play against a committee like the Mayor Ed Lee Committee for San Francisco. So you can't cover everything, but you can begin a process of recognizing where the public has some sense that the playing field is not level and that there is an inside game at City Hall.
Thank you.
Catherine.
I just wanted to clarify that the $614,000 amount includes contributions to ballot measure committees, and there's no limit right now for the amount that goes to, that you can donate. I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. Any additional discussion on this point? Are we in agreement as commissioners that we should prohibit political contributions from registered lobbyists at this time?
I guess I will give you an answer. I might. One of the, I would say, the overarching problems in my mind is that I do think that the more public disclosure we can get of what money is being spent to influence political decisions in the city, the better off we are. And I don't know what the overarching way in which to do it. I guess I'm less concerned about banning them from doing it, but I want it to be something that the public can be aware of and recognize who is spending money to manipulate the legal and governmental process.
I would say that along those lines, the proposal in the Chu Herrera legislation might be something we should also strongly consider. Having disclosure of written fundraising solicitations might help provide the public with more information about bundling that's gone on, that is being performed by lobbyists. And I, having heard my fellow commissioners on this, I don't think it's a simple problem. I think this is something that would probably require some more analysis so that we can come up with a solution that is both fair and adequate in terms of providing sufficient public disclosure while also addressing serious concerns about pay-to-play.
Anything further, commissioners? Does that give you sufficient guidance?
Yeah.
I have a quick observation. My organization is a California state lobbyist now, and so I'm thinking about what that means. And I have to check whether it means all of us individually cannot contribute. But that puts a different light on it for me if you think of lobbyists as public interest advocates for low-income people, giving our few dollars out of most of my staff's relatively modest incomes to participate in the political process, or or picturing lobbyists as, imagine the political cartoon of the lobbyist. And so it's something I'm trying to wrap my mind around a little, and not jump into something that, sometimes the unintended consequence of imagining a certain player turns around and catches you when you say the very people who were trying to give their $10 to an upstart new candidate to come along and do something different are prohibited, and we don't have the engine of alternative strategies. So I just want to be careful that we don't leap to a picture that's not a complete picture of the situation of who we're going to affect. We've tried to address some of this by Sunshine in the sense of frequent reports, detailed information, and as I read a number of the Friends of Ethics comments and reports of these meetings, one of the problems that all of these disclosure rules have to take into account is are the changes over time since these rules were passed in the media's capacity to dig, the nature of the media to put people into the picture of what's going on. We have all of this information available, but used to think that the free press would let us know when contributions were related to might be related to a development project or to something else. And the size of newsrooms has been shrinking over time. There are new media available, but they haven't really picked up the campaign contribution story the way that I think proponents of these kinds of disclosures and of ethics commissions generally thought they would at the time. So there's a little riff on two different angles of why I'm wrestling with but not sure how I'd want to go on this.
Well, I agree with you, Commissioner Studley. I mean, there are lobbyists and there are lobbyists. And, the cartoon image of the lobbyist is of someone evil and up to no good. But as you say, there are many public interest organizations that are lobbying for issues that really are for the good of the common good. So, yeah, there are unintended consequences, and it's
trying to follow this.
Also, at the federal level, the Supreme Court level, the state level, a lot of these, I think there is a lot of conflict, or laws at cross purposes. So we have to keep that in mind.
What I think we'll do with this item, if the commission is okay with it, is that very soon the Chu-Herrera proposal is going to be referred to us for comment and recommendation. So I think we can build a discussion on these issues into what's there, and if we determine that it doesn't go far enough, then we can pass that, continue to work on reforms that the commissioners want to see. But I think we'll continue that conversation when that's on our agenda, and see what we think needs to be either added to or altered in that proposal that will assuage some of these concerns.
All right. As part of that, I think it would be helpful to know if there are only 86 lobbyists, can we have a memo that sort of describes what each one gave over the last 12? Is that difficult to compile? I don't want to.
No, it's on the website, so the information is there.
Right, but I mean, if it was part of our discussion,
yeah,
I think that would sort of add meat to the bones on some of the issues that were raised by the other commissioners.
We can do that.
Okay. On to the next question. Should San Francisco increase the frequency with which candidates must report contributions and spending?
This one's a little more muddled because in reality, there are two reports that LA has that San Francisco doesn't. One of them is a quarterly report from the year prior to the election, which we don't require. And then the City of LA requires 3 quarterly reports in an election year, whereas we have the 6-month report that for the period from January to June, and then we have 2 pre-election reports prior to the election. And then both cities have what we call the late filing period, where reports are more regular. There's things percolating at the state level that will have an impact on how we conduct the number of and frequency of the reports that we have. And so at this point, we think we should see what happens at the state level before we enact local changes that we may have to change or undo in the kind of foreseeable future. And I'm talking about, within this calendar year, because those changes made, if they're made at the state level, will probably be for the upcoming elections, not this year, but beyond that.
So you think that it sounds as if what we may decide to do really depends upon what happens with local legislation here in San Francisco, as well as state legislation on the reporting requirements.
Right.
So it sounds as if we need to wait for that, but in the meantime, commissioners, any comments on this?
I agree with the recommendation to wait and see what the state does.
Any public comment on this? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
Should San Francisco increase the personal contribution limits in order to offset the influence of unregulated independent expenditures on city elections?
There are some concerns because even though the cost of running for office has increased greatly in recent years, there are some processes that are inexpensive comparative to traditional campaign measures, and I would think that one of the things that was indicated, for example, are mass emails, spamming and so on, which can be done for relatively lower thresholds. So I think the concern is based on the advent of technology, at least partially, and that reducing the threshold of activities would capture more activities that are less expensive. We're not entirely sure how extensive that would be, but again, we could look at doing this, but there are also things percolating at the state level that may change these requirements for everyone in the state, not just locally. Oh, you know what? I think I skipped ahead to number 5.
Is there any empirical evidence that raising it to 1,000 would offset the influence of the unregulated independent?
Yeah, and I beg your pardon. I was just talking about item 5. I'm sorry for the confusion. I beg your pardon.
Yeah. But I'm just curious as to the justification for raising it. There may be one, but the concept that it would offset the influence of unregulated independent expenditures strikes me as probably not. It's not going to have a whit of difference on that.
Well, I think if you raise the individual contribution limit with the expectation that it will allow candidates to have greater leverage in answering independent expenditures, I can see why somebody would think that, but conversely, independent expenditures might just go ahead and increase as a response. Traditionally in San Francisco, The feedback that we've gotten is people like the lower contribution limit and wish to stick to the $500 limit. At one point, the commission decided to index that limit to inflation, but in $100 increments. So in other words, if the consumer price index went up a few percentage each year, the contribution limit in theory would be a few dollars more, but we wouldn't actually raise it until it hit that next $100 mark. So it could be 10 or 15 years before it went from 500 to 600, although the index would be automatic. However, that was not adopted at the board, so our current limit remains at 500. I think there are a lot of folks that still support the $500 limit. I think there's a lot of candidates that would rather not see it, and certainly there's a lot of competition for political money in the city. But that's kind of an issue that, again, the commission and the board would have to decide what they think is best for this.
Well, what about the issue of, right now it's $500 for all candidates. Mm-hmm. And there is a difference between citywide offices and those who are just running for district election, district supervisor. So it does seem, and I know that the interested party comments included the idea that perhaps citywide office should get a higher contribution level than simply district offices. Any feeling about that?
It sounds reasonable. It seems like LA does differentiate between those two, and the justification is, I think, easy to follow.
Although San Francisco being such a much, much smaller city, maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. Any public comment on this matter? Any thoughts on the contribution limit? Okay.
I mean, I will note that it does. The memo suggests that this contribution limit has been in effect since 1983. So, I mean, $500 in 1983 was worth a lot more than today, probably upwards of 3 times more. So, I mean, at some point it seems the contribution limit will likely have to be changed, whether that's now or later. I'm relatively indifferent to.
I would certainly favor upping the contribution limit, and I would also want to look at a different contribution limit for citywide office versus district elections.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable idea, because the district elections are a very much smaller ballgame.
All right, we can look at that. Okay,
Next one is what?
So item 5, again.
This is the one that you were talking about.
This is the one I was talking about before.
Initially.
And again, my apologies. There are reasons to be concerned about effective uses of voter information and voter influence at smaller amounts of money. But again, the staff is looking at what's going on at the state and thinks that we should hold off on this at least till we see what the state does, and if we're not satisfied with their changes, then we can go ahead and address these.
And when do we think that the state is going to address these issues? Or finalize them, perhaps I should say. Do you have any idea?
Possibly in this calendar year. And if they don't, maybe that's when we decide we take another look at them.
Public comment? Next question is, should San Francisco Larry?
Getting to my feet, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Larry Bush for Friends of Ethics. I think that it's important that if you're going to take up this issue, that you do it promptly because of the November election. Because the difference between a $5,000 and $1,000 expenditure is considerable as you go into the November election. We have some campaigns that are going to spend a lot of money. They can send it in segmented amounts, so that if you had a contribution that went to political clubs at $1,000 each, and you have 80 political clubs, you suddenly spent $80,000, and we would have no way of tracking that as long as the threshold is $5,000. From our experience of doing outreach, spending $1,000, you can blanket one district about 10,000 times for $1,000 with email alerts. That's a lot of outreach. Certainly a world difference from when you do door hangers or mail or anything of that nature. So I would suggest that you keep an eye on the election calendar as you address this issue. And I recommend that you deal with it in the next 60 days.
Additional public comment? If not, then we should move on to the next question, which is, should San Francisco reduce the amount of time for which extensions of credit to a campaign are reclassified as contributions from the current 6 months to 1 month?
This is, again, a fairly clear one. In the Budget Analyst report, it states that in Los Angeles, extensions of credits have to be satisfied within 30 days. They have since extended it from 30 to 60 days because they felt that 30 days wasn't enough time for campaigns to get all their bills paid. So although the staff isn't sure that this, the impetus behind this is great, if the Commission wanted to make these changes, that services, or goods or services on credit had to be paid in full, we would recommend going to the 60-day that Los Angeles has rather than the 30-day that they used to have. But right now in San Francisco, as I stated, it's 180 days in order to avoid reclassification as a contribution. We do know that a lot of campaigns are slow in paying their bills, and I think a lot of vendors would prefer to be paid more quickly. But we deal with a lot of novice campaigns, people who don't have experienced staff and experienced treasurers, and they need a lot of hand-holding in getting their paperwork done. And frequently it's quite beyond them. And although perhaps the majority of successful campaigns raise more money and have more professional staff, we need to think about all of the different types of campaigns that we deal with.
Well, I agree with what you just said. I just from my observation on the time that I've been on the commission, it does seem as if the smaller, less experienced campaigns are the ones that really end up feeling the brunt of some of these regulations and reporting requirements, since they don't really know what they're doing. And it is very complicated for anyone that doesn't have a lot of experience. That's not an excuse. Nonetheless, it seems as if it's that end of the political campaigns where you see the most problems.
And I apologize, I misspoke. I said 60 days in LA, it's 90 days in LA. So LA's current rule is 90 days, ours is 180.
Commissioner Studley.
I would just really like to understand how this operates, how a shorter period would be good for ethics enforced values. I'm just at sea on understanding what advantage there is of a shorter time period. Is it that things become clearer and closer to the time that the election took place?
Well, campaigns are still reporting the accrual of expenditures even when they're not paid. The concern is that there may be relationships between campaign and vendors that ultimately end up being not extensions of credit as a business transaction, but extensions of credit as a favor to allow the campaign to use money that they owe for their bills for other things, at least for a period of time, and that giving them 6 months to pay their bills, allows them to go past the election. Now, it's 180 days from the time the expense is accrued, not the day of the election.
Got it.
So early expenses accrued early have to be paid earlier than expenses accrued later. But you could.
You put your finger on my problem. I thought it was election day, and that left me puzzled. That helps.
Public comment?
Larry Bush for Friends of Ethics. The part of what prompted this is exactly what Mr. St. Croix said, which was that vendors floated loans to candidates and would later see if the candidates were going to be able to pay them back. They expected those candidates to win, and when they won, to be able to lobby those candidates on behalf of other clients. And that became a standard way of doing business about 10 years ago in this city. It is less true today, but it was certainly prevalent at that time. You had people you'd never heard of in your life who suddenly had big-name campaign consultants and who were able to then raise the money to pay off the debts after they were in office. As you can imagine, the desirability of contributing to somebody who's in office as opposed to somebody who lost office is vastly different. In this case, what you're really seeing is that within 3 months, they should be able to pay off if it was a legitimate loan. You looked at the question of whether or not it was after the election. The fact is the last 10 or 20 days before the election is when the heaviest amount of spending goes on. That's when the loans begin to really accrue for mail houses and for TV ads, for radio ads, and all the rest of it, because people get panicky and they want to spend a lot of money to get their message out. And it's fair enough to say that that's what they're going to do. But this is just designed to make sure that what's being done is that vendors are being paid for actual obligations and not because somebody created a mechanism to avoid having to raise the money at the time.
Additional public comment? Commissioners? What is your...
So would a shift to, say, 90 days keep more of these kinds of transactions and clarifying whether they are actually real expenses that will be paid or need to be reclassified happen within the time that we can be watching the election? Seems like part of it is just the 6 months just throws a higher proportion of them post-election day.
Right. So to a degree, yes.
Does staff see a downside to 90?
No.
I mean, other than the burden on candidates who don't have sophisticated staffs and,
Right.
The cost associated with that. I mean, in addition, if most of the cost is happening in the last 20 days of the election, whether it's 90 days or 180 days, I mean, the candidate's going to be raising the money after the election to pay off the debt. I'm not sure it would make that much of a difference. I guess to me the concern would be more like if a lot of money was being loaned 30 days before or 60 days before, 90 days before, and then the candidate got election and had the 3 months after to raise the money to pay that person back. I mean, that starts to seem problematic. But if really the concern is over money that's spent in the last 20 or 30 days, I'm not sure this really remedies the problem.
I don't think it'll confer a great benefit, but it may confer a small benefit. So we'll go ahead with that.
If we develop a proposal, then we'd be able to hear, ideally from smaller campaigns, about whether this seems, whether in that balance, whether this seems particularly stressful or difficult for them.
Mm-hmm. What do we do if it isn't, say, paid back in the 180 days or 90 days if we adopt that, it then becomes a contribution.
Correct.
And if that contribution exceeds what the law allows, what do we do then?
The excess contribution is forfeitable to the city. So if you have a printer's bill for $3,000 and you don't pay it in the deadline, it becomes a $2,500 excess contribution that has to be forfeited by the campaign to the city general fund.
So they have to come up with money they didn't have to pay the bill with in the first place.
I mean, does somebody have to bring an action to collect it, or
Not in excess contributions, no.
it just happens automatically?
Yeah.
If he didn't have enough to pay it off before, where's he getting it from now? I mean, does it go, is there some violation that attaches to the candidate
Well,
or the contributor, depending upon what the case may be?
in currently, excess contributions, the fault is with the candidate.
Right.
So the excess, again, is forfeitable. There's not a punitive action against the contributor. And
If that's the case, how does this make any bit of difference? Because if I loan a using myself as a bad example, if a vendor loans a candidate $100,000 or there's a $100,000 bill, and at the end of the day, the 90 or 100 days pass, and what the $500 is the contribution, and the other 99,500 is the vendor doesn't get that? Is that what you're saying?
right, the candidate is on the hook for it to give to the city.
And the vendor cannot.
The vendor still ostensibly has to be paid, but under this scenario, they're not getting paid; they're making a contribution. So the vendor, whether they like it or not, are not going to get paid for that bill if the money is then forfeitable to the city.
Oh, okay. That would be
Yeah, the vendor does get. If the vendor did not intend for this contribution to be a quid pro quo loan type thing, they could be, for a large bill, they would be on the hook for it.
I see.
And the vendor would be in a bad position.
Got it.
So-
No, okay, so it does make.
So we would assume that the vendor would be doing everything possible to get the candidate to pay the bill.
Right.
Preferably timely as they went along, or up front, if they're serious.
Yes, Mr.
David
Popel.
Popel, if I might, on this point, my understanding is that some vendors that used to float credit to candidates and campaigns to a much greater degree are requiring to be paid upon receipt of services so as not to be in this position. And I would also just clarify a bit as to the question about whether you can get to the campaign. I thought the language was that no candidate or campaign, no person may make a contribution and no candidate or campaign may accept or receive. And if that language is there, then it's not just on the contributor or vendor or what becomes a contributor in this scenario, but it's also on the campaign at that 90th day when it becomes a deemed contribution. So I think you could actually get to the campaign and find a violation and not just a forfeiture. But I don't know. I suppose that would take a little research. Thank you.
So does the commission at least want to consider a reduction to a 90-day window?
In my view, yes, subject to what Commissioner Studley requested, which is let's talk to some candidates with maybe less sophisticated, reporting staff and do some analysis of really what the burden would be.
Did we talk to any at all?
No. All right, and the last recommendation simply is a discussion of enforcement. And I would point to the memo that clarifies some things, because the Budget Analyst report inadvertently inflated the number of cases that Los Angeles settles, because in talking about infractions that involve excess contributions specifically, they consider those enforcement matters and we don't. So looking at the number of enforcement cases, there's still a lot more cases in LA that are settled than here, but not as much as the Budget Analyst report. Ultimately, too, we learned that the information that the Budget Analyst gleaned was from the website. They actually didn't talk to the LA enforcement staff, and we did. And as a result of those conversations, it's kind of difficult based on the way LA handles enforcement matters in terms of settling or resolving them, and the way we do to really detect what the actual difference is in the number of cases that are settled versus dismissed and brought to hearings. Obviously, the enforcement aspect of our work is something that's been under the microscope for a very long time. We've dramatically improved our enforcement capabilities, our enforcement work, and the way we handle cases. And I think that those efforts have really resulted in much better work by us in this area, particularly with the current staff that we have. And it's something, of course, like everything else, we can always find room for improvement, and we're working on ways to continually improve. We could move these particular matters in terms of excess contributions and forfeitures, et cetera, into the enforcement area, and that would actually improve our numbers, but it would be kind of an artificial improvement. So at this point, it's something we could possibly do. That's not necessarily going to render great changes in the actual status quo.
Well, does LA have a different statute that causes the excess contributions to be brought to the Ethics Commission as opposed to San Francisco, where you say we don't do any enforcement action on excess contributions?
I think that their ordinance is written differently, or their enforcement regs. I mean, we do collect we do enforce the ordinance where if you make excess contributions, we do collect the forfeitures.
Right.
It's not that we're not doing that, but we don't consider them enforcement
Don't
action.
count them as enforcement action.
Right.
But we are responsible for collecting the forfeiture of the excess
Right.
contribution.
And that's more a function of the auditors than it is of the enforcement staff.
Okay.
And as well as the campaign finance staff, obviously.
Any public comment on the enforcement policies?
Larry Bush from Friends of Ethics. I'd like to make two recommendations from our group. One is that when enforcement actions are referred to the FPPC or others, and they do take action in cases involving San Francisco entities, that information be included in the executive director's report so the public can see what happened when complaints were filed, and that in fact they went on to another agency and were handled and what the results were. So that's one thing that I think would build a little more confidence that there's not just no action being taken in enforcement. I think the second thing is that in some cases, contributions that are not allowable are not being forfeited back to the city. Last election in the mayor's race, Mayor Lee returned a number of contributions to the donors, but the city law is that he had to give those donations to the city, not to the donor. It's like telling a bank robber, we're going to give you, the bank robber comes in and gives the money back to the bank, instead of understanding that there was an enforcement issue that had to be done. So I think that in future, when those cases occur, that there needs to be a message from the Ethics Commission to the offending candidate that you owe that money to the city and not to the donor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
David Pilpel. I've made previous comments and suggestions about ways to increase the transparency of investigations and complaints and the handling thereof without compromising the substance or investigatory techniques, methods, whatever. And I'm not going to repeat those tonight, but staff is aware and I think are trying to look at those and maybe implement some that don't require additional resources. I also just wanted to make a general comment on this report. I think doing things differently with existing resources is certainly something that we can do and look at, and all the things that you've talked about generally go in that direction. But doing more and different things with existing resources is difficult, and I would suggest very strongly that if you're giving staff direction on these points, that if any of these suggestions require additional staff or other resources, that be highlighted and called out, so those in this room or elsewhere who want to advocate for doing more should know that there's a price tag associated with that and advocate for additional resources to make those things happen, because otherwise it's at the expense of something else that's likely just as worthy or perhaps more worthy. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Additional public comment?
I think that last point, go ahead, Commissioner Reddy. Well, I was just going to say, I think that last point was interesting. Another option to your list was that the commission could think about other things that we're doing not within that same proposal and balance the resource allocation. If there was something that we thought were worthy of it, we could look outside these elements to see how it compared to other activities, to the extent that the staff director helped us identify what kinds of work might be able to support something. If there was something we were very interested in doing, we could look at how else we might trade off our priorities to accomplish it. Excuse me, thank you.
I have two comments. One, talking to Commissioner Studley's question, I think the problem of going outside this memo with other areas is because they aren't listed on the agenda. We may have to put them down for a subsequent meeting.
Yeah.
And for example, I do have something at the end when we talk about other possible things. I do have an item that I do want to bring up. But my original question was addressed to the city attorney. Is it right that what Mr. Bush said, that if there's a contribution made to a candidate when it becomes apparent that it was an improper contribution, either it was too much or it was solicited or the employer gave the employee the money and the candidate just gives it back, is that, or is he required to forfeit that to the city?
John Givner. I went out to move my car, so I just walked in. Maybe my timing was just right. Generally, if a candidate has accepted, we're talking about Section 1.126, the contractor contribution ban. Is that right? Oh, what?
If a candidate accepts an illicit contribution, let's say an excess contribution, and they give it back to the donor, is that a violation of the law?
There's a certain time period. I believe it's 48 hours. If the candidate has received it and held it past that time period, again, I think it's 48 hours, or has deposited deposited the money into the candidate's account, it's been accepted and has to be forfeited.
Well, and Mr. Bush brought it up when you were out of the room, unfortunately, that, for example, in Mayor Lee's campaign, there was, I know, stories in the newspaper about contributions that he became aware of that were suspect at best as to whether or not the employer had repaid the employees for their contributions. And so, as I recall, he gave it back. And Mr. Bush was suggesting that that wasn't the way it should have gone. It should have gone to the city. And I was just saying, is he right on that?
I can't comment on what happened in that campaign. As you may recall, our office wasn't advising the Ethics Commission or Elections Department on that particular campaign. But as a general rule, if a candidate committee accepts an excess contribution, that excess must be forfeited to the city. That's Section 1.114 of the Campaign and Governmental Conduct.
And by excess could be meaning an improper contribution from some party who it should not have been allowed to contribute.
Well, I think it depends on what the impropriety was, because different provisions of local and state law set different restrictions, and some provisions require forfeiture. So I'd really want to look at the particular situation.
Chair Han, I had some questions about this as well. So I'm a little confused on the 2 points that were raised in the report and the staff's memo about it. So the first point is that we San Francisco do not conduct as many enforcement actions, and he's suggesting that Los Angeles had 354 and we had 137. In your explanation, you refer to a different time period. Instead of October 2004 to 2011, you refer to since 1993, and suggest that from that time period, the numbers are much closer, 496 to 508. What's the point of that? I mean, are you disputing that we had 137 compared to 354?
No.
Okay. So we are initiating far fewer enforcement actions in LA.
The answer to that is you're probably right. We may be, but what we're saying in the memo is that LA also includes these enforcement actions, which are forfeitures, which we do not include.
Are those the excess contribution cases?
Yes.
Okay, but how many? It would be helpful to know of these 203, how many have been in the time period that was used by the budget analyst? Because you're taking 203 out of 496 instead of giving us the number out of the 354.
I think we're going to have to look into that a little bit more.
Okay. Secondly, if you take that number out, are we saying that the excess contribution cases basically always get, not convictions, but whatever the word, get enforcement actions? I'm a lawyer. I should know the right term for this. Fined or sustained.
So the way LA handles it, I'm the one that spoke to LA.
Okay.
The way they handle it, from my understanding, is that not only do they get the excess contribution as a forfeiture, they, in addition, enforce the provision that prohibits it. So they get the forfeited contribution, then they initiate a enforcement action against both the committee and the contributor, if that's appropriate. and impose a fine. How they do it is a little different. They have a sort of a tiered system. Like the first time you might get off with nothing. The second time it's like an infraction. So that's not included in here, but there is sort of a tiered financial, it's pretty set basically what the fine is. So we traditionally do not start an enforcement action when there's an excess contribution violation, if you will. We just collect the forfeited amount. So the proposal here is just highlighting that close to half of their cases over that entire period of time were excess contribution cases. So if we had also initiated those as enforcement actions, that our enforcement action statistic or number would have likely gone up. And not only that, those actions are generally sort of, for lack of a better term, slam dunk settlements, if you will. I mean, there's really no fighting it for the contributor or the committee. So they're not dismissed in any way because it happened. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So we're saying that the excess contribution has a dual effect. It artificially increases the number of enforcement actions that they appear to be initiating, and it increases or lowers their rate of dismissal because almost all of those end up in enforcement actions being sustained.
That's correct. We also have the mechanism to make them enforcement actions as well. And I think traditionally the Commission has not done that, so that's sort of something to consider at this point if that's a way that the Commission feels it should go. The comment that I received from LA was that by doing that it has helped them to some degree because it does put contributors on notice as well, and keeps sort of both the committee and the contributor in sort of mutual check of each other.
Okay.
Because the contributor knows they're on the hook as well.
I think when we revisit this issue, it would be helpful, from me at least, to be comparing apples to apples. So if you're going to be using numbers, I would use them for the same time period as the budget analyst so that we can really see what the delta is.
Commissioner, I would suggest it has a third impact on the numbers, and that is they impose fines, which are over and above the excess contribution, so that it also makes their collections look better than ours.
Interesting. You know, my other comment is that in general, I think it's somewhat dangerous to look at rates of sustaining enforcement actions as a measure of how well the Ethics Commission or any body is doing its job. And I know, for example, prosecutors certainly look at conviction rates and they look at how many cases they bring, but at the end of the day, these are just very rough and attempts to try to see how effective we are. And I'm not sure, maybe it's the only measure of how well on the aggregate we're doing, but I caution us and the public to look at numbers like this with caution in trying to evaluate how that relates to our overall effectiveness.
And we're also trying to compare a jurisdiction of about 800,000 people to a jurisdiction with 3 million more. So sometimes it's difficult for those comparisons to be apt.
Any further comment on that? Commissioners? Now, while those are the 7 questions that you presented to us, Mr. St. Croix, in addition, there were some additional areas that you referred to in your memo, and I don't know if any of you have comments about that. There was some discussion about acceptance of contributions on city premises.
And, if the Commission wishes to specifically spell that out, that's fine. We think it's already illegal under the Statements of Incompatible Activities in San Francisco, by extension. It's not clearly stated, but it is not legal to take contributions in city buildings.
Madam Chair, as I read the attached package of comments from participants in these meetings, there were some interesting questions that came up, and I just wonder how, Mr. St. Croix, you were thinking we might, go through them and raise others of them at future times. Did you think that the group that we looked at here were the only ones you wanted to bring forward at this point, or is this a rolling process? How might we suggest if we have some others?
Those were the specific things outlined in the report. Some of these others, are based tangentially on the report and other comments that were brought up. So if there's any in particular that you want to discuss, I think we can do that now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to drag it out, and I like the process of the staff giving us some idea of what the context is. Some of these may, in fact, be items that are important, but others may be things where there's a factual misunderstanding, or if we flag them, we may learn that there's already something that covers that point. So one possibility would be for me to just let you know which ones I thought
and I think that Chair and I discussed
their attention,
that we were going to encourage commissioners to contact the two of us with any that you wanted to parse further.
Excellent.
And we would put them on future discussions.
The only one I'll mention here that I can tell you I will flag in that way are these supportive committees, the general purpose committees that kept coming up, and just either laying to rest that there are rules that cover them in terms of limits, or is there something that we need to do about a growing area of potential concern?
Commissioner Herr.
Can I ask one other question about item number 7? I know we've kind of moved on. Would that be okay, Madam Chair? Has the staff considered what we can do within our budgetary constraints and within our staffing constraints to improve our enforcement process?
Well, that's been an ongoing self-reflection for years, and again, I think recently we've done a much better job. There's a lot in the pipeline that's been the product of very productive work that will be, coming out in future meetings, and I think we're going to continue to ramp up our capabilities and our accomplishments in that area. So it's something that we contemplate all the time.
But I mean specifically, what do you think has changed recently, or will change in the near future?
I think we're doing a lot more work in terms of taking complaints and getting better legwork done in terms of interviewing witnesses and looking at paperwork and documents. One of the areas it's difficult to improve is a lot of folks that are investigated drag their feet. They make it difficult to get records. I can't speak to specific cases, but I can say that we have half a dozen ongoing investigations where the respondent has promised records and not shown up repeatedly for appointments and things like that. And then we move to subpoenas and work that way, but it's a longer process. Mm-hmm. So in terms of getting cooperation from witnesses, I don't know that there's a way to improve that. That's just a built-in problem. We do have a vacancy on the enforcement staff, and part of our budget request has been that we be able to fill that spot and therefore have another person working on these issues. But I think we've been better about sticking to the matrix of accomplishment that we do in terms of what we need to do when and how quickly we need to get it done. But there's just a lot of factors in aggravation that slow the staff down. Mm-hmm. But having said that, specifically, we're much better at identifying documents that we need. We're much better at identifying witnesses that we need to talk to. We're much better about doing everything we can to get compliance with the request of investigations. We've also communicated better with the departments and everything about what's expected of them, for example, under statements of incompatible activities, which they are the primary enforcement agency for, and so on, and alerting them about requirements of compliance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any final public comment on the 7 areas and additional areas that
Larry Bush from Friends of Ethics. One of the additional areas was improved accessibility of information. And I wanted to point out a couple of things. One is that until 2009, when the Ethics Commission adjusted what was defined as a lobbyist, there was a category called an expenditure or grassroots lobbying. And that was where the bulk of money was spent. That's when people reach out to the public and ask the public, would you please contact City Hall on behalf of our issues? Just to give you an example, from the last 3 months of 2009, which is the last period we have AT&T spent $10,000 in direct lobbying, but $67,786 in expenditure lobbying. PG&E spent $5,000 in direct lobbying, but $65,792 in expenditure lobbying. The Anti-Public Power Group, SF Common Sense Coalition, spent nothing on lobbying, but $58,110 in expenditure. We believe that the Commission should restore this category. It's a category that exists in other jurisdictions, including Los Angeles. If you look now at the current election, think about 8 Washington and the fact that they are holding meetings trying to encourage people to take action favorable to them. None of that is being reported to the public. The only way it was reported before was as an expenditure part of the record. Same thing goes for the Warriors Arena. It's simply invisible. It's gone dark. So I would suggest that you take a strong look at, when you're looking at accessibility of information, to what it was that you did provide information on and now don't. And the second category in that is major donors. Major donors are those people who contribute $10,000 or more in an election cycle. We have no place on the web that tells us, here are the list of major donors in San Francisco. They are, for want of a better term, the fat cats of our election system. The fact that they're not specifically pulled out and revealed to the public is a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right. I think we've given you work to do.
Yes.
And we will come back and revisit this with more specific language. And appreciate the work done. Next item is electronic filing. And I have a report on that.
Yes. There is a staff report regarding this. Recently, the state passed legislation that would allow local jurisdictions to require the electronic filing of statements of economic interests. These are the Form 700s that are filed annually, that are filed within 30 days of assuming office, and that are filed within 30 days of leaving office. What we would like to do is go forth with a proposal to the FPPC with NetFile as the entity that's going to provide electronic filing for the SEIs. And we believe that electronic filing of SEIs is important because it allows us to upload information onto our website within 24 hours without having the need for us to process paper forms, redacting them before uploading them. So it would be, information would be available much more quicker on the website. What we would need to do to process this is to send a proposal over to work with NetFile, to send a proposal over to the FPPC along with a check for $1,000. So we are working on that process. In the meantime, what we want to do is put regulations before the Commission to adopt so that we can get in place this process for any filings that come to the Commission as of January 1st, 2014. Now, these proposals only apply to filers who file their SEIs with the Ethics Commission. And these are folks who are department heads, members of boards and commissions, agency heads. We're not talking about the designated employees who file the SEIs with their own departments. We may go that route at a later date, but right now we're only focused on the folks who file the SEIs with the Ethics Commission. So there are 7 regulations broken down into 4 decision points. And in general, for 3 of these, 6 of these regulations, I mean, 3 of them are kind of like identical. It's only that they refer to different sections of the code with that require folks to file with us. So the first regulation, the first regulations are draft regulations 3.1-103-1 and 3.1-500-1. And what these regulations will do is require folks who file with us to file their SEIs in an electronic format prescribed by the Ethics Commission, beginning January 1st, 2014. So that gets us to decision point 1. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions on this? Seems straightforward. Public comment?
David Pilpel. I have spent a fair amount of time with the staff talking about my concerns. I have no objections to this proposal. In fact, I'm very supportive of electronic filing. I have some concerns about how this would roll out. I did want to provide the Commission a copy of a document that I found on the web about NetFile. I can pass it up. And we've got copies for staff and the public if anyone cares, about NetFile and their Form 700 electronic filing solution. I thought the Commission, whether you adopt these regulations tonight or in the future, should be aware of how this system works. My understanding is that it doesn't actually, that you don't actually go through the Form 700 on each line, but it asks you questions, and based on the data that you enter, it fills in the form for you. One of the challenges initially is that filers in the city under this scheme would have to electronically file their Form 700, but still file paper copies of their Sunshine Declaration and Statement of Ethics training. However, in the future, those forms may be added to this system, and importantly, the next time they file a Form 700 electronically through the system, it would have the same data. So to the extent that your investments and property records and all of the things that one might have as substantive disclosures remain the same, those would carry forward, and to the extent that there are changes, one can edit those changes essentially, but it requires more work the first time one is filing and a lot less work on subsequent filings. That's my understanding. Also, with regard to the regulations, I looked very carefully at the language of the C&GC code 3.10, 3.1-103, et cetera, that's attached here. I believe those positions that are listed in 3.1-500 and 3.1-510 are also in 3.1-103A and B, or more specifically A1 and B1. And so I'm not sure that the draft regulations in the 500 series are actually required. I think that they're already those persons are already listed in 3.1-103A and 3.1-103B, and so I would ask staff to look more carefully at that. If that's the case, then I think the 500 series wouldn't be needed.
Thank you.
Less regulation. Thank you.
Additional public comment? Commissioners, any questions on that?
Motion?
Yes, please.
I would move that we
I'd
adopt.
like to hear the
Comment.
staff's response to David Pilpel's question about 3.1 dash.
So I'm looking at the ordinance that he cites. Well, it's true that, for instance, the mayor is already listed in section 3.1-103. The Board of Supervisors, the clerk is listed also in that section, but the members of the Board of Supervisors are not listed there. Okay. Okay, I think David brings up a good point. But 3.1-510 is different, so I think that we still would have to have a regulation to pull those folks in.
State law requires that the conflict of interest codes specifically list out different categories of filers. 87-200 filers, which are in the 3.1-500-510, include managerial employees that manage public investments. So those are listed out in 3.1-510, like the chief assistant treasurer, that I don't believe are listed in under the 3.1-103 section.
If I could just clarify,
Phil?
that's true. However, those are asterisk positions, and those individuals file with their respective department's filing officer and not with the Ethics Commission, and therefore would not fall under the electronic filing requirement in the first phase because they're not. The Ethics Commission is neither the filing officer nor the filing official, and the 500 and 510 folks are where the Ethics Commission serves as the filing official and not the filing officer under state law. So I think we're good, and all I was suggesting is that the folks that you're trying to capture are already in 103 one way or the other. Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Pilpel. Based on that, my recommendation is that we just cross out draft regulation 3.1-500-1. And that we also, when we get to it, cross out draft regulation 3.1-500-2. And that's it, yeah. And -3.
All right, so we're eliminating those.
Right. Because they're already covered, as Mr. Pilpel points out.
All right, on decision point 1, we only need to consider draft regulation 3.1-103-1. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Any further questions from the commissioners? Can I have a motion?
I move that we adopt decision point 1.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We pass 3.1-103-1.
The next regulation basically requires each filer to provide a working email address to the Ethics Commission. And then once they do that, the system will generate a password that will be accessible only to the filer via the email address. And what we are asking under the regulation is that they provide to us at the Ethics Commission a working and unique email address on or before January 1st, 2014.
Sounds very controversial.
I could live with that.
Now, that's 3.1103-2. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what about 3.1-500-2?
We are eliminating.
You eliminated that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Stephen can address why we need the email address.
So the Form 700 needs to be signed under penalty of perjury. So there needs to be some authentication method to determine that you are in fact the person that you say you are when you go into the system. So the way the system works is that commissioners would provide an email address to their commission secretary, who would provide a list of email addresses to the Ethics Commission, and we would input those email addresses into the system, and then the filer would go to our website and would enter their email address, which would send the password to the account back to that filer. And because of that process, the Ethics Commission staff nor anyone else would have access to the password, only that filer would have access. So we would know that when they go in there and they complete the form and they check off and say that they're signing under penalty of perjury, that they were in fact the ones who logged in. This is the authentication method that's used in the only 2 available systems that the FPPC has approved. So if we decide not to collect the email address, we would not be able to use any of the systems on the market right now.
Any questions on that one, commissioners? Public comment?
David Pilpel again. I don't object. I just have concerns about burdening city officers who may not have email, may not want to have email, may not want to subject themselves to the information collection and privacy policies of a third-party email provider, and for which a city department doesn't have the resources or doesn't want to provide email, that they have another option. And so that's what your next reg provides for, is some alternative scheme. I think it's going to be very important to notify appointing officers, appointing authorities, board and commission secretaries about their responsibilities here, both by 2014 and going forward, and to update the Good Government Guide so that new appointees and members of boards and commissions know that this is a new requirement. So within 15 calendar days of a change to their address, email, or phone number that they need to notify the Ethics Commission, that's an absolutely new requirement. So there's that, and I'm sure all of that training is going to happen, and would happen even better if we had a training officer, yet another resource need that the commission staff is now down, but a position that I understand we're attempting to fill. So thank you very much.
Yeah. There are people who don't have emails?
There's one there. There's one right there.
Wow. Okay. Very impressive. All right. Any other public comment on this draft regulation? Commissioners?
I'm happy to make a motion.
Thank you.
I move decision point 3 to approve the 2 draft regulations.
Decision point 2.
2. I'm sorry, I turned the page too fast. I was on the topic, not the,
Right.
Okay. That we approve decision point, well, actually, draft regulation 3.1-103-2.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
The decision passes. And we move on to the next one.
The next draft regulation 3.1-103-3 is what Mr. Pilpel alluded to. This generally will provide a small exception to the e-filing requirement for those who cannot use a computer or who cannot e-file. Such persons may seek written permission to file an original paper version of the SEI with the Commission, provided that that person seeks permission and provide provide the reasons why the request should be granted, and that request has to come in at least 15 days prior to the deadline for filing the Form 700.
Comment on this, Commissioner Herr?
I'm trying to imagine what bases would and wouldn't be granted or denied in this situation. I mean, so if someone says, I don't have an email address, that's sufficient to, I imagine, to get a waiver. But what other kinds of decisions are we anticipating here?
I think the explanation would have to have a little bit more substance than that, just to prevent people who don't feel like filing electronically to just say, I don't have an email.
So what, he has to have a philosophical basis for not wanting email? I mean, what?
Either a philosophical or a technical one.
If one requested to file a written rather than electronic, would we then convert that into an electronic form so that the public would have access as it would to all the other electronic?
It wouldn't be exactly the same. First of all, when the paper copy comes in, it would be manually processed, so it would not be available in as timely a manner as the electronic filing would be. And then the second aspect would be that when an electronic filing comes in, we get two pieces of information. We get the information in a data format, and then we're also getting it put onto the form. So in the future, if we provide this information in a data format to the public, anyone who filed a paper copy would be excluded from that data set, so to speak. So the public would has a potential in the future to have less information from those who file paper copies.
That was what I was questioning, whether one might want to do the paper one, thinking that it would be more difficult or less likely that the public would get access to it. It would require more work, because as I assume if they file electronically, those are available to anybody going on the website and pulling it up, right?
Yeah, you're correct.
And when you file a written one, they have to come down here and look at it.
Well, we would scan the paper copy into an electronic format and post it, but it would be an image versus in a data format that could potentially be searched in the future. Right now, our website only shows a list of those who have filed, who have not filed, and pulls up the form. But if everyone starts e-filing, we have the potential to provide the data in other data formats that are more easily searched and analyzed. And so you're correct that if it was in the image format, they'd be excluded from that set.
Could that information be typed in manually by someone?
The ways the systems that are available right now work, no, it's not impossible. It can be developed, but I don't expect the vendors to do that.
Do we think that there would be that many people who would opt for the paper filing?
We don't know.
We don't know?
I think this was to handle any unforeseen circumstances.
Commissioners?
The presumption is they'd have to have a compelling reason, otherwise they wouldn't get permission.
Public comment?
Well,
Commissioner,
you don't mind? I mean, if that's the standard, then I think we should say that. And I'm okay with that, because I agree. I mean, I could see an advantage for the reason Commissioner Rennie stated, why someone might want to file in paper. Either a compelling reason or certainly require some hurdles that make it clear that this is not going to be an exception that is abused.
Larry Bush for Friends of Ethics. Having these documents be searchable is really the most important thing that happens if you do this electronically. So let's take, for example, I wanted to search and find all of the city officials who report that they have no income. That would be surprising that someone would put down that they have no income, because most people do have an income of some kind. But if you did that, you will discover that we have a number of city officials who claim having no income. Some of those are now the subject of investigations. But the only way we know that is by going through each individual commissioner and looking at their Form 700 to see, did they disclose that they had an outside business or other form of income. I could do it all at one time if it was all electronic.
Well,
obviously, people did not want to disclose they had other income.
We aim to make your life easier, Mr. Bush.
Thank you. I'm helping you with that.
Any other comments? Mr. Pilpel.
Again, thank you for this. Two things. First, to Mr. Bush's comment, I would note that there's some specific exclusions to income reporting for the Form 700. So there are individuals who receive a government salary either from that agency or from another agency that don't need to report that as a source of income on the Form 700. There are a list of other forms of income that are not reported. Also, not all filers are Category 1 filers, which require full disclosure. Some are 2 through whatever, and that varies depending on the agency with respect to what interests they need to report. So not all filers are equal. With respect to the waiver concept, my understanding is that there are now up to 20 or so filers who are voluntarily filing electronically under provisions that have been in place for several years, which is about 3% filing electronically. I would suspect that if we get up to 20 filers on paper, not electronic, that would be a large number. And if we can move within the course of a year from 3% to 97%, that would be a major change. Lots more data, lots of accessibility, and then we can talk about what waivers were requested and granted and whether there was good cause and whatever. But I think granting the executive director authority to grant or deny in his discretion is fair and reasonable, and we'll see how this plays out. There are a lot of other steps that will need to happen here, and I will continue to work constructively with staff on this. I'm very interested and very excited about this, notwithstanding what some people may think. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Commissioners? Shall we move forward with this? Do we have a motion?
I would move to adopt decision I would move to adopt draft regulation 3.1-103-3, subject to the amendment that we would add compelling, the word compelling, before reasons in the second to last sentence.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Decision point 3 passes. And we have one more.
Okay, the last regulation basically requires any appointing authority or commission secretary, whenever they submit a notice to the Ethics Commission about who has assumed or left office, that the notice contain the name of the appointee or department head who has assumed or left office, whether the appointee or department head, when that person did it, the name of the board, commission, the date that happened, the email address, mailing address, and telephone number of the appointee and department head. And this basically just gives us more information in case we have to contact the person who needs to file the SEI.
Commissioners? Any questions on this? Public comment?
David Pilpel. Again, good outreach is going to be necessary to make this work. My understanding is that the mayor's office right now is in pretty good communication with staff about changes in appointments. I don't think that's uniformly the case with regard to other appointing authorities. There are some sort of somewhat obscure appointments that are made by various city officials, and so bringing them all up to the same standard of communication within 15 days would be good. And I noted, as I read the language of the law, failure to provide such notice may constitute official misconduct. So there really was some contemplation that this 15-day notice requirement was pretty important, and yet it doesn't happen as regularly with folks other than the mayor's office as it could, in my opinion. But points to Ms. Wheaton and points to the mayor's office for doing their work. So again, I'm sure this will play out and staff will do a good job with outreach. So I commend this regulation to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other public comment? Commissioners? Can I hear a motion?
I'll move that we adopt decision point, or the draft regulation 3.1-105-1.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Draft regulation passes, and we are done with that. Now to consider a possible closed session. Is there any discussion that we need to have prior to a motion regarding this?
No, we need a motion and public comment.
Yeah. Can I have a motion to move into a closed session?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Public.
I'm sorry, public comment. Public comment on whether or not we should move into a closed session. Hearing none, call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Going to move into a closed session.
SF TV, San Francisco Government Television.
It may sound simple, but teachers tell us repeatedly that a personal note from a parent or student means the world to them. ThankATeacherToday.org explains how to send a thank you note to your San Francisco school teacher. You'll also find directions on how to nominate your favorite teacher as the Teacher of the Month. The single greatest predictor of student achievement is teacher quality. ThankATeacherToday.org.
SF TV, San Francisco Government Television.
Okay, thank you very much. We are in a construction site. The work is underway, so we want to make sure that we not only celebrate, but celebrate safely. But I'm here to welcome you all. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Ed Riskin. I'm the Director of Transportation. Couldn't be happier to be here today, to see all of you here today, to celebrate what's really a pretty tremendous milestone in the advancement of Phase 2 of MUNI's T-Third Light Rail project, otherwise known as the Central Subway. It's just such a tremendous effort and a capstone of many, many years, and for some of you, decades worth of work to get to this point. Certainly something worthy of celebrating. We've got a lot of people who, in one way or another, themselves or through their organizations, are part of how we got to this point. So I just want to acknowledge some of them. But besides the people, some of whom you'll hear from that are up on stage, including our mayor, fast hands, members of the boards of supervisors, members of the SFMTA Board of Directors. We also are pleased to be joined by our lead federal funder, the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Transit Administration, Mr. Leslie Rogers. Let's give him a hand. He's the regional administrator. He's the one that was part of delivering that big check to us back in October. I don't know that he's here. Another important partner, we're actually sitting in his right-of-way underneath his infrastructure, Caltrans Region 4 Director Bijan Sartipi. We also have, one of the things the Central Subway does is bring connection to regional transit, including the upcoming high-speed rail. So we have Ben Trapoussis from the High Speed Rail Authority. Let's give him a hand. I saw him here. Thank you, Ben, for being here. We have a number of our community supporters as well. Karen Flood from the Union Square bid. Very strong partner. They've been putting up with us as we've been working through her neighborhood. Carolyn Diamond from the Market Street Association. Kathy Maupin, Andrew Robinson from the Yerba Buena CBD. Jim Lazarus, I was just talking to from the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. He's already working on the next phase, I think. We have our Chinatown, many of our Chinatown community leaders, including in the front row, Ms. Rose Pack and Mr. Gordon Chin. And we have a number of members of our community advisory group for the Central Subway, people who have volunteered their time, as everybody else I just mentioned has, year after year to help shepherd this project through to make sure that we're doing it well and doing it right. And then finally, there's a lot of leadership and support from the community, from our federal partners, from the government, from City Hall that makes all this happen. But at the end of the day, somebody has to drive this project forward. So I want to acknowledge the Central Subway Program Director, John Fungi. Since 2006, John has been working day and night, living and breathing this project to make sure that it happens. I think he's got a Central Subway tattoo on his arm. I think the tunnel boring machine you're going to see downstairs has spent more time with John than his family has. But he's been bringing his decades of experience and expertise and commitment to improving transit in San Francisco to bear in this project day in and day out for the last 7 years now. So I know this is a big day for him, and I want to thank him and his excellent team, both of SFMTA staff, DPW staff, contractors, consultants, all of whom have been working hard to get us here today. But then I also want to acknowledge some of the political leadership that's really been a part of bringing this project forward. There's significant federal commitment to this project. Between the first and second phases, nearly half of the funding has come from the federal government, recognizing the regional and national significance of this project. So, of course, our senators, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, their offices have been behind us all the way. And then in particular, our leader, the leader of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has been one of the strongest advocates and supporters for this project. We're delighted to have her new Chief of Staff, Robert Edmondson, joining us. But if we could, let's give a round of applause for all of our elected officials, federal, state, and local, who have been behind us. We also have labor. I saw Mike Therio here. We're putting a lot of people to work with this project. There's not just the transit benefit that we get in 2019 when we turn on the switch and open revenue service, but there's the immediate economic benefit that this project is bringing now to get people to work. And while the economy is a little stronger now, when we started work a year or so ago, it wasn't so much, and we were getting people off the benches, in their boots, working on the ground. An important benefit of this project to the economy of San Francisco today, not just tomorrow. Ultimately, this is about public transportation. It's about investing in the future of public transportation in the city. We are a transit-first city. We need to better move the people who are trying to get around San Francisco today, as well as those who are going to be coming to San Francisco tomorrow. So this is really about building for the future, strengthening the transit system that we have today. So I think I'm going to stop now because I've already talked much too long, and bring up the people that you really want to hear from, starting with the leader in San Francisco, a man who not only understands transportation and jobs, and I think you've probably heard him talk once or twice about jobs, but understands the importance of infrastructure and what investing in our infrastructure means for the economy and the future of San Francisco. I was pleased to follow him as Public Works Director. I think having been a Public Works Director, he really gets this stuff. And as a mayor, he has an even bigger view of this and has done a great job, I think, so far in leading the charge for investing in infrastructure, for putting jobs in the ground, and for making transit first a reality. So please join me in welcoming our mayor, Mayor Ed Lee.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you to you and your staff again, to your board of directors, Tom, and the rest of the commissioners. Thank you for your leadership. I also want to thank the Board of Supervisors for working so closely with us, and a couple of them up here. I think this is a really good reason to celebrate, supervisors, that we have this great project. I also want to say a big thanks to our former mayors. You know, I have the privilege of being here at this time, but I think back, and I know Rose knows what I'm talking about, 2.5 decades, you know, Willie Brown, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, the mayors before us, working in concert with our federal partners, but working very closely with our neighborhood leaders, we're able to get and enjoy this day. I'm looking forward, actually, to eating the cake. Not just because I like cake, but also because it represents a struggle for our communities for quite some years, to say that we are going to be here and we're going to be part of the future of this city. And that's what this T-line extension really means. Central Subway is a great transportation project, but it is also a reflection that our neighborhoods are here to stay and grow and to prosper with the city. And yes, we will have that conversation about the future beyond that. But the future right here is about making sure that we connect up the north and south. The modern San Francisco will have a transportation system that will reflect that. And this is why it's so meaningful for us, because I do know in a few years, Ed, that we'll be saying, why did it take us this long to get here? This is such a great idea to connect up. And I know this is at the heart of the feelings of people who live in Chinatown, whether it's in the Pingyun projects or in the small businesses along Stockton Street, all the way down 4th Street, right to here. We're going to marvel at why we wouldn't have done this faster and quicker, because we're going to grow with this system. And I think in a very short time, you're going to see the value of this transportation system. moving people as quickly as it does now when you see the subway of Market Street moving a lot of people back and forth. It's going to be the same thing. And there's a lot of growth that's happening in our southeast corridor, and they want to connect up with the northeast corridor. So this is our future. This is what we've been talking about, and it's right here before us, and it starts. And I also want to give a big thanks, Reverend Norman Fong, you and Rose and Gordon and Malcolm, so many other people have been such strong leaders of this effort, along with our federal partners and our regional partners. And to have the names of the boring tunnel machines that are reflected in here, Mom Chung, thank you for being here. We have a descendant here that is, I believe it's the grandniece. And then, of course, Big Alma, which will be the boring tunnel machine that shows up next month, and it's will be under construction, be complementing the 2 tunnel boring machines that will be part of this effort. I'm excited to hear the revving up of the tunnel boring machines. I understand we can't do that today because of safety reasons, but once that noise starts happening, once the digging starts and the tunneling starts, then I think we'll have that great reflection of 2.5, if not 3 decades of effort that has been here to make sure we modernize our city and make sure that our communities are connected up. Also want to give a big thanks to the collaboration of agencies that will be working for the next 2.5 to 3 years, whether it's our police department, our parking control officers on the streets, our public works, making sure the streets are safe for everybody, connecting up a little bit of understanding about the disruption that we'll have in some of the areas of the city, but knowing that it's our future that we're all doing this for, and working with the small businesses all along the way to make sure that they're all included. We want to do it right, and this is why I think the federal government said yes, from President Obama all the way down to our communities. We want to do it the right way. So I'm here to say thank you to everybody. We look forward to this good work. Look forward to working with our labor teams and making sure we train more people to get these jobs, include even more local participation as we enter this newest contract to do all the stations and the work. Our board and my office want to continue promoting our local participation as much as we can. They deserve it because our city has worked so hard to get to this place, and we want everybody to share in this success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our local leader is Mayor Ed Lee, and one of our main leaders in Washington, D.C., as I mentioned, is the leader, Nancy Pelosi. And there's no question, without her persistence, her tenacity, her confidence in this project, we would not be here today. So very pleased to be joined by her newly anointed Chief of Staff, someone who's been working with and close to this project for many years. Please welcome Robert Edmondson.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here today. The leader was so disappointed that she couldn't make it because I know that she is so excited about this event and had really hoped to be here, really to say thank you to so many people, to the mayor and the Board of Supervisors, to our partners at FTA, to the workers who are enjoying the fruits of this labor, and most importantly, she asked that I say thank you to the community that has worked so hard and so long to make this project a reality, and she asked that I read a brief greeting on her behalf today. Dear friends, today's event marking the launch of the tunneling phase of the Central Subway is a cause for celebration in our city as we move one step closer to enhancing our transit-first infrastructure and connecting San Francisco's diverse communities. For the thousands of San Franciscans who squeeze aboard the 30 Stockton each day, the Central Subway means an easier commute in one of our nation's most crowded urban corridors. For Chinatown, the subway ensures better service and equal transportation access for the neighborhood's residents. And for all San Franciscans, this project is a project of consensus, an effort to improve mobility, expand transit, protect the environment, promote commerce, and bring our city closer together. Progress for Central Subway means more jobs for San Francisco workers, less congestion for our commuters, more safety in our transit system, and less pollution in our air. Over the last decade, we've worked together in partnership to secure over $1 billion in federal funding for this project, and our investment will pay off in the form of a higher quality of life for the people of San Francisco. Congratulations as you mark this major milestone, and I look forward to joining with you in the near future when we can celebrate completion of the Central Subway. Best regards, Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you, Robert, and please again convey our thanks and gratitude to the leader. Continuing on the path of leadership, from his time first coming into office, one of the strongest voices at City Hall in support not just of this project, but transportation in general, is someone who's both the president of the board and someone who also represents the district, which will serve as the terminus for the Central Subway, for the T3 light rail, both in the current phase and perhaps in a future phase. So very happy to have here joining us, President of the Board of Supervisors, representing also District 3, David Chu.
The sun is shining on the Central Subway today. Thank you so much for being part of this celebration of the first tunnel boring machine. I have to say it's been incredibly inspiring to learn about the history of Dr. Margaret Chung, otherwise known as Mom Chung, and her role in our city's history. Our country's first female Chinese-American doctor in the heart of Chinatown, someone who adopted over 1,000 sons, mostly servicemen, during World War II. I can tell you, as the son of a tiger mom, I have a good sense that Mom Chung was a tiger mom. And that's what we have needed to build this project. Her history of fighting is helping to build our city's future. We all know that over the past 2 decades, thousands of San Franciscans have been fighting to implement the Central Subway. And as someone who served on the Citizen Advisory Committee before I was elected to office, I know that there are thousands of community members, some of whom are represented here today, from Bayview and Viz Valley, to Mission Bay, to Union Square, and of course to Chinatown, who have fought to get us to where we are here today. There have been dozens of political leaders, and I want to thank our good senators. I want to thank Nancy Pelosi. I want to thank generations of Mayor Lee, and I want to thank my colleagues, every member of the Board of Supervisors, including Supervisors Kim and Breeder here today, have shown their support for this project. After hundreds of community meetings, thousands of pages of studies, and I think tens of thousands of hours of debate, we are ready. The talk is going to continue, but the real action is going to go underground. Now is the time to tunnel. Now is the time to build our Central Subway. Now is the time to finally connect our north and south communities between the densest neighborhoods on the West Coast and the city that will grow in the decades to come. And as we celebrate today, I challenge all of us not to stop in Chinatown. We should continue to come together quickly with the vision of where our Central Subway should go next, to North Beach and to Fisherman's Wharf. That is our next challenge. But we will take a moment today to celebrate what is a great day in San Francisco. The amazing technology that these machines represent show that San Francisco, we know how to make Muni a world-class transit system for a world-class city. Congratulations.
Thank you, President Chu. So the Central Subway ends in District 3, but the project starts right here in District 6, where we're standing. And I mentioned we're underneath the Caltrans right-of-way, but we're actually right on 4th Street, where we're all standing and sitting. We're right on 4th Street. So we're taking up a lot of real estate here in South of Market. We've been under construction for a few years now. We've been working very hard to be good neighbors to the people, to the employees, the businesses of District 6, and we're grateful for the support we have from the person at City Hall who represents them. Please join me in welcoming Supervisor Jane Kim.
Roughly about 12 or 13 years ago, the very first Board of Supervisors meeting I ever attended was a Land Use Committee meeting where I came to speak on behalf of then Chinatown Community Development Center to speak in support of the Central Subway project. It was the very first meeting I ever attended at City Hall and the very first time I ever spoke at public comment. 13 years later, it's such a pleasure to be here today to honor a tunnel boring machine and also to be here to honor an Asian American woman. I think it's just incredibly satisfying to know that we are making headway on this project. It feels like it has taken so long, and it has taken so long. So many years of community advocacy, the thousands of meetings that President Xu had already mentioned. And it's great to be here with some of my past colleagues and now with my current colleagues, both from Chinatown, our Community Tents Association, our SRO Families Collaborative, our Pingyun Residential Association, and now, of course, those that I work with currently today from the Yerba Buena CBD to many of our South of Market allies. This central subway is going to be an amazing expansion both for the South of Market and for Chinatown. I used to ride the 30 Stockton and the 45 Union almost every day, and those of you that have ridden for it and fought for the extensions of those buses know how heavily those lines are used by our youth, our families, and our seniors. Over 90% of our residents in Chinatown don't own cars, and that's the type of smart growth neighborhood development that we want to encourage, but we also have to support those very residents that believe in that type of model by having an increased infrastructure. This project is also incredibly important for South of Market. We have plans for how we plan to expand both residential and commercial development along this line, so we're supporting the infrastructure that's coming in as well. And we have so many working class families and seniors along this South of Market corridor that are going to be able to enjoy being able to go in through underground to Chinatown and hopefully one day North Beach and Fisherman's Wharf as well. It's a little awe-inspiring to stand next to the giant tunnel boring machine that's been used around the world to bring major projects to life with as little cost and disruption to the surface community as possible. Although our residents along this corridor are being very patient and have kindly not sent too many emails of complaints about the noise of construction, but I think that also speaks to the work of the workers that are here today that are making this project possible. This incredibly powerful tool that's already been talked about will construct the entire length of both tunnels, approximately 1.5 miles long, ranging in depth from 40 to 120 feet. I'm really happy to be here today with so many of the supporters that fought to make this project a reality, and I look forward to the extension of the Central Subway in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. So we have the Board of Supervisors, and remember the members of the Board of Supervisors also sit as the County Transportation Commission. So they're not just kind of bringing their leadership and support from their representation on the board, but they're also bringing the funding through the administration of the Prop K sales tax that is part of the funding of this. So I want to thank the County Transportation Authority as well for their support and their leadership. The other leader who's a member of the Board of Supervisors and the County Transportation Commission is Supervisor London Breed from District 5. Let's please give her a hand. We're grateful for her support. More importantly, she's my district supervisor. She represents a district that I live in, and I'm kind of feeling a little left out here that my supervisor isn't talking about the subway stops we're going to get. So I think we'll also plan for Phase 4, where we're going to kind of hook a left, come back south, and get a subway into District 5. Don't want to be left out. Another District 5 resident is my boss, and we have great leadership from the federal government all the way down, but the kind of frontline leadership is really the SFMTA Board of Directors that through the years have had to make the difficult decisions in terms of expenditures and contracts and use of the right-of-way and changes in the transportation system. The hard decisions really come down to the SFMTA board. We're very lucky to have, I think, a very committed, engaged, forward-thinking board, and they're currently led and have been led for a number of years by the chairman. And I'm not just saying kind words because he's my boss and could fire me because I'm an at-will employee, but because he's really brought great leadership and direction and stability to this agency. That's been a big part of why we're here today. So it's my great pleasure to welcome to the podium the chairman of the board of directors of the SFMTA, Mr. Tom Nolan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Riskin. I could listen to Director Riskin introduce me all day long. I just love hearing these superlatives. On behalf of the board, I am delighted to be here. This is a huge day for us. It's been a long, hard struggle. I want to thank all those involved in it. A number of people have been mentioned, but there's some who were very supportive who haven't been mentioned. One is former mayor of San Jose and congressman and the head of the DOT, Norm Mineta, who was instrumental way back years ago bringing this to fruition. And our current DOT director, Ray LaHood, has been terrific, and his entire staff, Leslie and Peter Rogoff. It's been great to work. I want to call a special shout out to a former member of our board who's been an ardent supporter of this project for many years, Will Dinn. Will, right there. Thank you, Will. Steadfast support. This has truly been a labor of love for our board, and there have been many critics along the way, but I am totally convinced, absolutely perfectly convinced, that when this is open, everybody will realize this is totally worthwhile. It's worth all the struggles that have gone forward. It's been a long time coming. We have great leadership with John Fungi and his team. We really appreciate that. And this day marks the beginning, and I'm looking forward, Mr. Mayor, to the dedication when we're finally able to ride this. I did tell the mayor I have a slight problem personally. My term will be up before it's dedicated. So I've asked him, I begged him for one more term so I can be here on that great, great day. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So it's because of the leadership of the SFMTA Board of Directors that we executed the contract for the tunneling work about a year and a half ago. Our contractor is Bernard and Prelio Healy, and they're the ones responsible for this site. Right underneath where you're sitting is the first of the 2 tunnel boring machines, which will be launching on June 10th or 11th. As you can see, even before you take the tour, and I encourage you to do so if you're able, it's pretty significant work. You can see the crane behind us that's bringing in the pieces of this machine, piece by piece. It's 20 feet wide. It weighs 750 tons, and the entire apparatus is longer than a football field. And this is the first of 2 that will be making its way from here up underneath BART, underneath Chinatown, and up into North Beach. The second one will follow a few months later. That whole process will only take about a year. So for all of the hard work done to move the utilities, to build the box, the tunnel work goes remarkably fast given the expertise we have with our contractor and the advances in tunnel boring technology that allow this to happen with minimal disruption above ground, at least from the tunneling. This happens down below the ground. We're not ripping apart the streets to build the tunnel the way they used to in the old days. So the little noise, little vibration, just as we're going about our business in the next year, quietly below the surface, these machines will be steadily making their way northward. Pretty impressive. So to close us out, I want to invite up. Yeah, I don't know about that. I want to invite up one of the great cheerleaders for not just this project, for not just Chinatown, but the whole city. The relatively new but longtime member and now executive director of the Chinatown Community Development Center, the Reverend Norman Fong.
I'll be quick. All right, man. Okay, 2 words. Everyone say, "Go Giants!" Go Giants! That's in response to the call, but also what we're doing here today. We're here to help Go Giant boring machine. Okay, you got it? All right. And there's 2 of them, and we have the family members of the 2. They're named after 2 excellent, wonderful people. One, David already helped me do the intro on Dr. Margaret Chung, who was known as Mom Chung. That's machine 1, ready to go. We're going to see it real soon. She was in San Francisco from 1889 to 1959. She was the first Chinese-American physician in the country, but also working in the heart of Chinatown. But what she did that was really different was she adopted a lot of servicemen, American servicemen, over 1,000. And one of them that she called and bugged the congressman from Minnesota to create the first female branch of the Navy. And here today to talk more about her is Gina Lowe Weiss. Give it up for her.
Mayor Lee, distinguished guests, friends, and family, thank you for honoring our great aunt, Dr. Margaret Mom Chung. I have to admit, when we first heard about this, we were really excited, but we had no idea what it was. So we did a little research, and we found out what a tunnel boring machine was, and we looked at each other and said, really? Really? They're going to name a massive, humongous, gigantic construction machine after our Auntie Doc. That's what we called her, Auntie Doc. And then we thought about it, and then we said, you know, this is perfect. They're actually quite similar in several different ways. This tunnel boring machine is a pioneer as it will start the tunneling of Phase 2 of the Central Subway. Auntie Doc was a pioneer, as you've heard, as the first American-born female Chinese physician in the country, and she started the first Western medicine clinic in Chinatown. And while this TBM will help build a subway that will bring together neighborhoods of the city, Auntie Doc brought together servicemen, politicians, Hollywood, and military brass in their common dedication to fighting, or in dedication to the Allied cause. Mom Chung, the TBM, is huge and will be a real power to be reckoned with. Mom Chung had a personality that was larger than life, and she also was someone to be reckoned with, as she lobbied for the formation of the Navy Waves. Even though she was never given public credit for it, she could never join because of her race, age, and the fact that the U.S. government had blacklisted her for being possibly gay. And you know, she actually got involved in the Waves and forming the Waves because after the Pearl Harbor and we joined the war, she volunteered to be a frontline surgeon, and she was turned down because she was a woman. And that drove her nuts. So therefore, she spent years and many, many phone calls and meetings to get the Waves created, which she did finally have a handle in. And lastly, San Francisco is counting on Mom Chung, the TBM, to get the job done. And the real Mom Chung, she got the job done. She, through sheer determination and hard work, became a physician. She was the eldest child of 11 kids. Back then, traditionally, she should have been helping Mom and Dad take care of all the younger kids. But no, she wanted to be a doctor. And she strove, and she just said, I'm going to be a doctor. The thing is, though, is that she had her mother's support. And that's what made everything okay. But can you imagine 11 kids and your mom saying, can you take care of them? And she says, no, I'm going to school. So she was a real, as my dad once said, you know, Auntie Doc, she is a real, what did he call her? I can't remember. He's something, but basically he was a power that you didn't want to mess with. And Mom Chung also supported the World War II effort by adopting and supporting about 1,500 servicemen. And as I said before, she was instrumental in the formation of the Navy Waves. So San Francisco is going to have a wonderful, world-class central subway. And our family is proud and humbled that Mom Chung has a part in building it. And I know that Mom Chung is really smiling down upon us now. Thank you.
I mean, just what you said in this meeting was very helpful. If you tell us, look, it's more likely than not you're going to, that's actually, for a lot of the cases, is going to be dispositive for go on losing legal position. And you know, the memo was nuanced, and you guys did a thorough job. I definitely appreciate it.
The commission is back in session. Can I hear a motion regarding deliberations?
Pursuant to Section C3.699-13, I move that we not disclose our closed session deliberations regarding litigation.
All in favor?
Public comment?
Oh, sorry, public comment? Yes. Hearing none? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Okay. Approval of the minutes of the commission meeting of April 22nd. Any corrections or changes? Public comment?
David Pilpel, on page 3, motion 13-04-22-1, I think it was actually the same motion that Commissioner Rennie made that was finally seconded by Commissioner Herr. I'm not sure that it was a new motion. I think Commissioner Herr didn't want to second until after public comment, but it was listed as 2 separate motions. Anyway, not that important, but I like the typo on page 6. This was a good one. My public comment about Section 2 about gentlemen's agreements, it was actually settlement agreements, but somebody probably listened to the tape and got it wrong. Anyway, so I would suggest that you strike gentlemen's at the top of page 6 and replace it with settlement. That was the intended word.
Is that in the first paragraph?
Page 6.
Page 6 at the top.
No, page 6.
It's a fun one. It's a good one. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
I move to approve the minutes with the correction about gentlemen's agreements being settlement agreements.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. Executive Director's report?
I only have one highlight, just to remind the commissioners that we have budget hearings in June before the next commission meeting, so I will be attending at the Board of Supervisors hearings on our budget, as well as all other departments, before the next meeting, and we'll report back to you then on how they go. But I'm optimistic about this year.
That's good news. We get any more resources are always welcome. Any questions for the Executive Director? Public comment? Items for future meetings.
As I mentioned earlier, I would like to put on the agenda a discussion concerning the issue that was raised by Mr. Bush about what used to be what were called expenditure lobbyists. And I've got to say, frankly, not being here at the time, I don't have a lot of understanding as to who was covered or what was intended to be covered under expenditure lobbyists. But I guess I would just sort of classify the agenda item to be a discussion whether or not we ought to amend the regulations so that we capture what was previously captured under the heading expended lobbyists. Because what concerns me is when I look at the outfits that reported expenditures of the California Union Issue Project, say in 2007, spent $46,000. Small property owners, $1,000. Then in 2009, apparently the San Francisco Common Sense Coalition listed $58,000. San Francisco Firefighters Local 798, $367. And as I understand it, those kind of contributions, whatever they were referred to, would not be covered under our present, the present regulations. And I would like to have a discussion concerning whether or not we ought to make some amendment that would recapture monies that are being spent to influence public opinion on either governmental projects or whatever governmental action they're being spent on.
I think it's a good idea.
And I think that we want to include a discussion of what Mr. Givner suggested, the referrals.
Right.
Is that how we should refer to it? Probable cause referrals?
So I think just outside of the public session and during the break, we also discussed the possibility of setting a new process or considering new regulations dealing with referrals of matters that referrals of complaints that are within the Commission's jurisdiction.
Any other items that we want to add for future agendas? Public comment?
David Pilpel. I'm not sure I understood what Mr. Givner just referred to about referrals and during the break.
No,
I'm happy to. I'm happy to explain. When a question arose in a closed session discussion about how the Commission handles referrals, and that is a public session discussion to be had.
Okay.
And
so
you're
just
at a future meeting.
That happened at a future. Okay.
That's right.
All right. Just wanted to get the.
And there is a concern that some of us have that often such referrals appear simply as dismissals and add to the number of so-called dismissals of which we are accused of having too many. And so one of the things we want to look at is if there's a different way to categorize probable cause issues that are referred out to another agency.
So it's a referral.
So that it's not a dismissal, but rather a referral.
So it's the disposition of matters that are before the Commission that get referred to another agency.
Correct.
And how to categorize that disposition.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And this, of course, is part of the problem when people start looking at the numbers. Then you're like, well, if all we're about is numbers.
Exactly. Exactly.
49% of statistics are almost half, but never mind. I did have something else for a future agenda. Now I'm losing it because we got sidetracked with this. Give me a second and I'll remember it.
You're too young to have these memory problems.
I'm sorry. And after memory, what's the next thing to go? Never mind. One second.
Anything further, Commissioners? Mr. Pilpel? It'll come back to you. All right. I think that that concludes this.
Public comment.
Not quite.
Final
I just remembered it. Sorry. Sometime in the last month or 6 weeks, President Chu and City Attorney Herrera proposed amendments to various laws governing ethics to try to tighten up. The commission hasn't held a hearing on those. The way I understand it, they're written in such a way that it would not require the commission's concurrence because it doesn't amend sections of the CFRO that the commission has approval authority over. Nevertheless, I think it would be good to discuss what the proposals are, what the impact would be, what they're trying to get at, how did it, just to talk about those proposals. They were sort of highlighted as a big deal thing. I don't know if they're a big deal or not. I think it would be good for staff to talk about what they are and what they would do, and we can just talk about it.
You'll be glad to know that we definitely plan to do that.
See?
And Mr.
Careful
Secretary,
what you ask for.
I thought you said that they would be sent to us. Is that?
They will be referred to us for comment and recommendation, but we don't have to actually
it's not the 4/5
adopt them in order to take law.
Understood.
Sometimes you ask and you get it immediately. Thank you very much.
With that, I believe we conclude matters before the commission today. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you and good night.